And I'm back. We're live on Facebook. We're recording on Zoom. Only a few people in. And give me a second here. And all right, welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corner. May is for Mystery series author talks today. Before I get started, actually, I just want to let everybody know on here on Zoom. If you just keep your microphones off and your video off, it keeps down the distractions and you accidentally showing up on Facebook Live, which we are on Facebook Live. Everybody there, use the chat feature or the comment feature there if you have any questions for our guest tonight, and I will relay it here on Zoom. Just use the chat box down there, and again, I'll relay it to our guest. And our guest tonight is Debra Is it Stein or Steen?
Goldstein. Debra H Goldstein.
Goldstein, formerly from New Jersey, now from Alabama. She was a judge and litigator and a civic volunteer. She has a BA in English and History from the University of Michigan. She worked in the publishing industry as well. She's a writer of nonfiction and short stories, and we'll get to her series of mystery books here shortly. And well, I'll mention it. Her Sarah Blair Mysteries is the mystery series. She is an award winner for her first book, which was Maze in Blue. And she was also an award winner as a litigator. We will discuss that. And she was also a contestant on Jeopardy. Debra, welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
How cool was it to be a contestant on Jeopardy?
That was very cool. Even though I lost to a guy who went on to be a 5-day champ, it was, I graduated college early and I went to New York to try publishing. So I had two goals. I was young and I thought you could do anything. So I said, I'm going to get a job in publishing and I want to get on Jeopardy. But just in case it didn't work out, I typed law school applications at night because I figured I had 8 months to succeed. And luckily I did. But Jeopardy was fun because I never realized they do rehearsals. They do a whole bunch of things. And if you're female, you have to bring an extra outfit. If you're male, you just need to bring an extra tie.
Why is that?
The audience notices what a woman is wearing. They don't notice the guy. So all he has to do is change his tie and they think he has a new outfit on.
Interesting. So what was Alec Trebek like?
Actually, I was even earlier. So,
oh, really? Okay. Yes. Who was the host?
Oh God, I was going to say Art Fleming, I believe was the name.
Oh, okay.
And, he was the one for the first 10, 12 years of it. So I was there probably in his last year. So.
Oh, okay. It's a sad thing with Alec because he was such a staple on that show, and all the things that he did, and just his courage of what he had to face and how he faced it and was open and honest about it.
And to work through the pain he had to have worked through at the end.
Yep.
But he was so graceful about it. Everything he did on that stage, they don't realize the detail of what he did as an MC until now that they've had all these trial ones.
Yeah. So did they break for commercial breaks, things like that? Or is that afterwards when you go through the whole game and then during the editing process, they flip in the commercials, or do they do it live?
They did it live. When we did it, they would break. And it was funny because in the very opening, they do a very quick, like a minute or two of the game before they take the first commercial. And I was very intense. And I happened to be running a category. So I'm smiling doesn't come easily. So I was sitting there going, hoping I was going to beat this guy out because two of us were literally beeping on each other because it's computer oriented. The third person knew the information we didn't know. So he and I were fighting all the way to the end of the game. And so they came up to me and the very first thing they said, look, we are coming back in 60 seconds. You need to smile and look like you're having fun. Remember, we're giving you this money.
Well, you can say it if you want to, but just how well did you do by the end?
At the very end, I put everything on the line except $100.
Yeah.
And I blew it. The question came down to, well, let me put it this way. The question was in the topic of history. However, I knew the answer if I had been doing theater. I knew who the movie, I knew the name of the movie, I knew which actors had played the roles. I just couldn't remember what the character's name was that was in the secondary role, which, so the other guy got it. I
Ah.
did. But we were neck and neck all the way through.
What was the topic that you were able to just kind of cruise right through and you got most of the answers right?
It was a political topic, and then I was followed by a literature one. I knew all the things, and it was funny because you pull things out of your brain that you don't even realize you know.
Mm.
I had studied like in the game. I had studied the presidential cards, so I knew George Washington, Martin Van Buren, and some answer came up. And I looked at it and I buzzed in and I'm going, oh God, do I know? I'll go Martin Van Buren, just because there was a band up there. And they go, yes. And it was a big answer. Made that was a good money answer. But you just don't know where it is in your brain till it
Right.
pops out.
What are some of the other things that you did to prepare for it?
That was the biggest one because I knew that they often had something that was either presidential or historical. And then I looked up some of the current events at the time. And also, I would probably do badly now compared to that because you need to know the pop culture. You need to know the stars of today. I knew all the Broadway things. That I was a great category for me. But if you don't know all the singers and the people of the today's pop culture, you're behind.
Did they give you the did you have an idea of the things that were gonna be categories, or was it just sort of
No, you don't have any
okay.
idea till you get there. And they mentioned you might get a category such as, and they just gave you a very general thing. But that was if you ever notice, there's like 5 categories that really make sense and one that is a very odd topic.
Mhm.
And that's the one they kind of mentioned. So you have about a minute to 2 minutes to think about what could be in that category. I think the funniest part was the tryout. Today it's done on computer. Then it was done in person. You came into a room, you sat down with 50 other people, and you thought you were coming by yourself. And you sat down in this big room and they took your picture. And back then they could get away with this. So they would take your picture and they would staple it to your application, is what it turned out to be. Um, but then they would have you play games. So they'd say, okay, we're going to give you a word like blue. Can you give us the questions? And they'd just go around the room. And if you were lucky, I had been told, keep your hand up and keep trying because they're only going to call on you once or twice in the game, in the practice. So I did. But I felt sorry for the person who was like the eighth person. What else can you think about blue? The sky had already been called. Um, and then what they did was they gave us the answers and we had to play a real game. That was the funny part because they took your answer sheets, they left. There was no way they could grade them, but they were watching us. And like the guy next to me is going, oh my God, I can't remember which opera had the elephant in it. You know, and we're going, don't worry, it's an average. And so you had to be calm.
So it was more of a psychological
Yeah. And then
type
they
of thing.
called 4 of us up. They said, we have a problem with 4 of your applications. Could you come up? And they called us up at the end and they had us wait. And everybody else was dismissed. They go, okay, you're the only 4 who made it out of this group.
Wow. Wow. Good for you. So what opera had the elephant in it?
Aida was the
Okay.
show.
Okay.
I got that one right.
So you have a bachelor's in English and history. The English part, was it writing? Was it literature? And then what was your favorite part of, or what did you study for history?
Well, took a little of everything, Chris. I was not your model student. I went to college and I thought I was going to be a journalist. And I was applying to things like Northwestern, Syracuse, anything that had a really heavy journalism school. But then my high school journalism teacher, and every now and then a person comes into your life and makes a difference. She said, you're not going to be that kind of journalist. You're going to be more free thinking. Instead of Michigan State or one of these other schools with a great journalism program, you need to go to the University of Michigan. They have all this stuff that's going on now, and you'll fit it better. And at the very last minute, that's where I sent my money. But I discovered that when you first start as a freshman, you have all these classes at 8 a.m. And I lived at the furthest point away from it. And they were teaching a Spanish class. And I had tested into the last area, but I'm not real good at that. So I would go to that class, and then I discovered they were reading from their books. So I'd go home and go to bed until, because I was staying up till 2 o'clock to have my pizza and my fun. I'd go home, go to bed, and get up for lunch. So I was not your model student. And the thing at Michigan was in those days when you signed up and for your classes and all, you had to get an approval. Well, I discovered you could go in the back door at the time and just put your paperwork in, which is what I did. So if you look me up for the first 2 years of my college education, everything's approved by Mickey Mouse, and my major was beachcombing. And then I took everything I wanted to take, whether it was drama, whether it was history. And I got near the end and I said, I better go check if I have enough to graduate because I knew I had a lot of credits. I went in and a counselor looked at me and he says, you have enough for a heavy English major, basically literature. He says, you have enough for a minor in speech, a minor in education. And he says, and you would have a double major, except you have history 101, but no history 102. You jumped into the higher level. He said, I don't understand. And I said, well, I didn't like 101. It was boring. So I just took what I wanted. I went back and picked up 102 and called it so they could call it a double major.
So how did you get into being a litigator and a judge and politics and law and all that? Where did you go and how did you get into that from Michigan or University of Michigan?
When I finished school, as I said, I went to New York with my two goals, and I was having a great time accomplishing the goals, but I realized I was at the bottom of the publishing heap. And I realized it was going to be a high climb to get out of the area that I was in. And I'm not a patient person in some ways. So I decided I would go on to that law school factor. And there was actually one advantage of it was people had seen me on Jeopardy the week or so before, because that's when the show aired. So I even got my moot court partner because he came up and said, I think I saw you on TV. And he figured I'd be smart enough to help him. Anyway, but the bottom line was I I went in and I always kid that I didn't get into my first choice. So I got on a plane and I said, I'm going to go see where I'm getting money. It was snowing. It was snowing a lot. I flew to Pennsylvania from New York and it was still snowing. I flew to some other states. It was snowing even more. And then I came through the clouds into Atlanta and it was gorgeous. The ground from the plane, I could see it was the red clay that Margaret Mitchell had written about. I was just thrilled. And I went to Emory and yeah, they were offering money. I figured as long as I graduated high in the class, I'd get any job I wanted. And I was going to be in a beautiful weather. I didn't realize it was the day after one of their horrible storms. So everything's clean, everything's beautiful, and it's spring.
Mm.
Um, but it was a wonderful experience for 3 years. Then I took my first job back in Michigan doing international tax for General Motors. And that was the winter. They had 36 to 38 inches of snow. I decided I no longer like snow. So I started looking for a job down south. Plus, I didn't like numbers. I decided I wanted to work with people. So I switched. I thought this was going to be a 2-year job, taking a Department of Labor job. Back in those days, you could go to a big firm, you could go to a corporation, but if you wanted to jump to a big firm from a corporation, you would do 2 years of government to quote, cleanse yourself. So that's what I was going to do in Birmingham, Alabama. Somehow things didn't work out. I ended up staying in Birmingham, litigating for 12 years, and I got lucky on a certain case that was a case of first impression. One thing led to another, and I ended up being picked up as a federal administrative law judge as one of the younger ones they had appointed.
You got a I lost it here. You obtained a juris doctorate. What
Yes,
is that?
the JD, that's a law degree.
Oh, okay. So tell us about some of the things that you litigated. Um,
Well, I litigated the equal pay case against, I was in Alabama, but I handled Alabama, a panhandle of Georgia, and Mississippi. But I handled the equal pay case against the Georgia higher education system. And it was the one that made the difference. It was a case of first impression, which meant it had never been decided before. And we were lucky and we won it. And that kind of, I got a meritorious award and that case is still good history. But that actually helped propel me. Another thing that helped propel my judicial thing is when I was writing all the applications and people were looking at my writing, people normally turn in very boring um, briefs and things. I had a wonderful case where the topic was, what is a Piscataway Indian and what is marriage? And so I had this wonderful thing because the guy was arguing that wherever his blanket was marriage. But it turned out when I did my homework, the Piscataway Indians were the only Roman Catholic Indian tribe. So um,
Interesting.
I had a lot of fun with that particular case.
How long did you do that before you became a judge? How was it that you got to the judgeship?
Um, I was
Judgeship?
I was a litigator for 12 years, and this is the highest merit appointment. It's not political. So when I was appointed, I jumped to the front for two reasons. One, my scores were high, and even without a military or anything, my scores were high on their own. But then they give you different segments, and one of the things was a written test where you do a decision. And I thought I hadn't done well, but it turned out when I called to see if, I thought I was going to end up having to retake it down the road. The guy looks at the score from the personnel department of OPM and says, "For God's sake, sit on that score." I said, "Excuse me?" Because, I thought 100 would be much better than what I got, which was like a 90 something. And he said, "No, you don't understand. You have the second highest score in the country."
Wow.
The only guy who beat me was a St. Louis judge who had been on the bench for 30 years. And in Missouri, they had a rule that when you hit a certain age, you had to come off the bench. And he hit it. And so he didn't want to retire. He was too young in his own mind.
Hmm.
So he he wrote a really good decision. He apparently got a few points higher than I did. But so we were in the class together, and it was kind of amusing because he was the oldest, I was the youngest. But when we had to do a moot court situation, they assigned me to be the judge and they assigned him to be my reporter, which is the person taking the notes. But we had a good time with that.
Now you won an award um, being a litigator. What was the award? What was that for?
That was the Meritorious Achievement Award from the Department of Labor. That
Okay.
was given for that case of first impression, Marshall, and the higher education case. And Georgia, it was the Georgia Southwestern case. And because it hadn't been done before, they were doing a test case out of Memphis, and they were putting a lot of resources into that. Ours was going to be the secondary one. They lost, we won.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you also worked in the publishing industry. Was that before or after all the law stuff?
No, that was before. It was the 8 months that I was in between. I
Okay.
deliberately left college in December, did a graduation at 3.5 years instead of 4. And then I took the time. And like I said, I was at the bottom of the heap. You're answering letters, you're doing miscellaneous things. You're reading some manuscript stuff, but you're not doing anything. You're not at the top of the animal of the heap. And I knew that it was going to be an upward climb. So I decided that I would go to law school.
Yeah.
Um, but I always wanted to write. And I kept talking about it for years.
Were you writing things at the time, even just short stories for yourself or poetry or something like that?
I had taken a few creative writing classes while I was in college. So I was writing some of that. But during this period of time, when I got out of law school, two things were happening. One, I was writing briefs and I was writing, proposed decisions and things. And those are the most boring things you can ever write. But I was,
I've read some books that could probably challenge that.
yeah, they were probably written by some of my friends. But but the one thing about myself was that as I was doing this, I would be like when I did a volunteer project or when I was doing anybody needed a party script or something, I was the one who wrote those humorous scripts. And um, one of the things that got me propelled back into writing was that I wrote a script for a Leadership Birmingham class. And it was a group of us that had to be together, all a subgroup for all year. And we were supposed to come up with a project. Well, we never got our project off the ground. Every other group did. We had wonderful projects that later came to fruition, but we had a couple of guys in the class that just wanted their certificate. So I wrote a script about pre-Seinfeld, you might say, of accomplishing nothing. And but the guys did not realize I had put their words in their own mouths. So we ended up um, having a run through of this. And another person who, the husband of the woman whose home we were at, was sitting in the next room and he's just cracking up because he'd heard his wife complaining for months about these guys. And he hears the stuff coming out of their mouth that she had told him. Um, and he came up to me afterwards and he goes, "You should write." And I go, "Ah, no." He goes, "You really should." And it gave me the confidence again. It was the funniest thing because I talked about it, but I hadn't really done it.
So did well while you were publishing or in the publishing industry, did you ever kind of show some stuff to some people or just tell
Not in,
people about it or just kind of
not in
kept it
those days.
quiet?
I was just, as I said, I was the bottom of the heap worker, just trying to work my way up.
So did all writing all these briefs and stuff, did that help in your writing career, which was to come afterwards?
Actually, no, because writing those things was almost stifling. You have to write in a certain style. You have to, it's almost a boilerplate type language. And to write novels, to write short stories, you have to be more creative. And what ended up happening for me, a friend dragged me to the Alabama Writers Conclave, which is a conference that's held in Alabama and different locations each year from the group. And they had excellent, um, excellent classes that weekend, but they also had contests. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I tend to be competitive. So they had short story, they had humorous short story, they had essay, they had the first chapter. So I entered just about everything the following year, feeling certain I was going to win something like short story or something. Turns out I didn't win any of those. But my essay, which was called Maybe I Should Hug You, which dealt with what happens when a woman hits a certain age and she suddenly is becoming her mother. And this is just a very short essay, but we see our friends getting sick or we see things changing in our lives. That essay ended up winning an award. And shortly thereafter, More Magazine picked it up and published it online. So one thing led to another. And just to take it into the next part, the book I had been writing on and off for a decade, shall we say, at that point, until a third friend said to me, "Stop talking about it. Let's go, leave the four kids home with Joel. Let's go to the beach for the weekend. I want you to write. I won't bother you except for dinner because she liked to go out for good dinners. You can use my condo, write. But if you don't do it, I never want to hear you say I'd like to write." And I spent longhand legal pages. I got up every morning and I wrote. That weekend, I ended up with 85 pages in longhand. 5 of those ended up in Maize and Blue, the first book. But that weekend, I saw that I had a beginning, a middle, and an end of that mystery that's set on the University of Michigan's campus. And that is the first book that a few years later came out. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, that was a perfect segue into the next thing. So your first book was Maize and Blue, which you won the 2012 Indie Bookstore uh, Publishers Award for.
Yes. That was a fun book to write. That was the book I had in my mind for years. And I'd do a little something and I'd put it away. Kids came along, the appointment to the judgeship came along, and I just got lost in it. So at that point in time, I wasn't doing it. But then I realized I could write it and I wrote it. And to tell you how it got published, I didn't realize the publishing industry was as hard as it is, Chris, because I was sitting there, I was president in Birmingham, Alabama of a women's network, and I was hosting 4 women that I wanted to showcase who were all authors of different types of books, had them on a panel, and I had decided as president I would be the moderator because I think a moderator should be like the beige wall behind me or the door behind you. The moderator is not part of the act except to move it along. On that particular day, that was right after that essay had been published in More Magazine and had won the award. Panel goes great. We open the questions up. There's 115 women in the room. I pick one woman to ask her first question. She goes, "Tell us what you're writing." And I realized, I said, "Oh," I get embarrassed. I said, "Oh, you must be talking about the Maybe I Should Hug You." That the other place published is um, More Hugs, Less Fear, which I thought was a horrible title. But anyway, so I said, "Now let's get back to these four women." So I called on the next person. She goes, "Tell us what else you're writing." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I think I have a mystery that's ready to go." And I stopped at that point and we went on to the other people. Okay, a few hours later, my phone went off and I looked at it and it had a message on it. And the message was, it was from a publisher. She said, "I'm a co-owner of such and such house, chalet." And she says, "There was a woman in the audience who's one of my best friends, who's a PR person. She says there's a judge with a book. She's seen your writing and she thought I might want to look at it. Would you like me to?" My answer was, "Sure. Do you want it gift wrapped? Should I put a red bow on it?" She said, "No, no, no." This is our emails going back and forth. She says, "I want it on an email." She told me what to put in the heading. I sent it off, and you know what's going to happen if she doesn't like it. She's going to hit delete. Well, I don't hear anything for about a week. And as you mentioned earlier, I have all these different titles and things, and one of them is a stepmom. And when I married my husband, he came with two older children who by that point had produced, they had actually, one of them had some little ones. There's a thing called Vulcan. If you've ever read the Anne George mysteries, Vulcan gets mentioned quite a bit because it used to moon the city. But anyway, it is harder to get from the parking lot to the statue, to go up the statue, than it is to anything else. So we're going up. The kids are a mile ahead of us. And my phone goes off and I look at it. And all I say, and I excuse myself here, I went, "Oh shit." And my daughter turns back to me and she goes, "We don't talk like that. There's children here." I'm looking at them. They're a mile ahead of us. And I go, "They're a mile ahead of us." And I look back at my phone and I once again repeat, "Oh shit." And she comes down because she's now sure I had a heart attack. She takes a look because I've turned the phone to her and she reads it. And it's only one sentence, but her reaction to the sentence is, "My partner in joy and I have read Maize and Blue and would like to offer you a contract." And Stephanie's answer was, "Oh shit." And I thought publishing was easy. That's how you get a contract. 1, 2, 3. Um, so I accepted it. And then they went out of business.
So, and then you got with Kensington later on, eventually.
Well, there's actually another book in between. I freaked out because I thought they gave me back. There were three of us who were selling well for them at that point, and I'd only been out a few months. And I had just won the IPPY award for this book, and I'm dying because I have 6 months of engagements, Malice Domestics coming up, and all this. And they said, "We're going to give you back the files. We're going to give you the artwork. That was all theirs, and we're giving you back your rights so you can put the book back up on Create Space or something at the time." So I did, but everybody I talked to said, "You've got to write something new." So I wrote the Should Have Played Poker, Carrie Martin and the Mahjong Players book. And I went to Killer Nashville, which is a conference in Nashville, and you can have them read 2 pages, an editor and a agent, because I didn't have an agent in those days. So the first editor and agent read the 2 pages. I get all this praise, and I ask, "Would you like to read the book?" They go, "No." And I was kind of, huh? And I said, "You just praised me a lot more than anybody else. Why not?" Because I asked the woman afterwards, and she said, "Because I'm here to buy a very specific line, and that your book doesn't fit it." 2 hours later, I went into the same kind of meeting, agent and editor, same praise. And I'm stupid. So I asked, "Do you want to read the rest of it?" And the woman goes, "Yes." And 5-star bought it a week later. So I really thought publishing was easy. Of course, after they published it the next year, and they bought it in August, their calendar for the next year was already filled. So it wasn't going to come out till the next year. So they bought it in 2014. It was coming out in 2016. Well, I sat there, wonderful. It comes out. It's out about 4 months, and they announced they're no longer going to have their mystery line. So, but this time I know the answer. Write something new, and that's the book that ended up getting me The Agent, The One Taste Too Many, the first Sarah Blair book. And I guess the thing I should explain is both my first books are more traditional mysteries, or they're traditional with cozy elements. And I knew I wanted to write a cozy. And as you all know who are listening, cozies tend to be small towns or confined settings, amateur sleuths. They often have a cat on the cover. They often deal with cooking or craft that the protagonist is active in. If you think Joanne Fluke, it's a wonderful baker. If you think this one, it's a knitter in Molly McRae's books. Well, anyway, I had one problem. I hate cooking and I'm horrible at crafts. And I said, oh, this is going to be difficult. And then I thought about it, and I figured there were other women and readers out there like me. So I decided to make Sarah Blair a woman who finds being in the kitchen more frightening than murder. So for everything I write, I've had to do research, but all the recipes are my kind of recipes. They're recipes of convenience, like Jello in the can or spinach pie made with Stouffer's.
Well, before we go into the books, because we're definitely going to get to those, um, what what drew you to writing mysteries? Was it your law background and or did you were you raised on mysteries? Did you always read mystery books or
I always read mysteries. As a child, you start with the the Bobbsey twins, Trixie Belden. I loved Sherry Ames. All these old books that have been out for years, and I loved the idea of the whodunit. That the two kinds of books I really liked. I read everything, literature of every kind, but I really loved biographies. So I'd learn about people and how their minds worked, and whodunits, mysteries. And the beauty of the cozy for me was I did a lot of traveling, both as a lawyer and as a judge. I could go across the country and read two of these on a plane because I'm a fast reader and I could enjoy them. They were they were so much more relaxing for me. You still have to think about them, and if they're well done, it's a whodunit you have to think about. But they're so much more relaxing for me than a heavier book. Um, so that's really became what I wanted to write.
I would like to touch on the second book you wrote. Should have played poker, a Carrie Martin and the Mahjong Players Mystery.
Mhm.
How did you come up with that title?
Well, there were three things there. The very first short story that I got published and won an award for um, had the Mahjong players in them. And I thought they were hilarious. They're a group of women who've been playing together since they had young children. So the way the title came, I couldn't come up with a title. I came up with Carrie Martin, and they always tell you, write what you know. Well, I was lucky. I had a mother who, though she was a Holocaust survivor, adored her children. And she, she made us a nice home. She cooked well. She did all these things. And she was there for anything that we did. And she was the kind of mother who told you you could do anything. If I told her I wanted to be to laugh or to be a comedian, she said, "You can do it. You can be Carol Burnett," because that was her favorite. If I said I wanted to, basically, she told me I could do anything except when I said I think I might want to be a singer, and she said, "No, you don't even sing 5 notes on key." Um, but so she was very encouraging. But that's kind of boring. So in Should Have Played Poker, I reversed it. What would happen if a mother abandoned a child? And then she grows up to be a young corporate lawyer, which I had been. So I'm stealing from things I know and things I don't know. And I can't come up with the idea, but I bring in the Mahjong players because I figured Carrie, my main character, was serious. She was a young, serious lawyer dealing with issues in her life, like her dad having a little bit of dementia and things like that. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do because I brought the Mahjong players in for humor, and I mentioned the Mahjong throughout the game. And I went to dinner, and I'm horrible on titles. So I was there with my brother-in-law, and I said, well, the whole thing revolves around Mahjong, and we come up with a solution that actually ties in. It's kind of the structure of the book. And he goes, well, I guess you should have played poker. And I said, thank you. You just gave me the title.
So did you play mahjong?
Yes, I do.
You do.
Yeah.
Just the actual with other people mahjong, or on your phone computer
I play the
solo
actual
mahjong.
mahjong where you play on the card, you have the hands with real people.
Oh, okay. I've never done that. I've always done the solo, on the computer or on my phone thing. But I've always, I've seen it on TV shows and stuff. People, well, especially like Seinfeld,
Yeah.
um, they played it a lot. But is it a hard game to play with people, or
No,
is it?
it's fun. It's well, there's two different versions. The kind you saw in Crazy Asian, the movie, where they're playing without real. That's an unstructured version. There's about 114 hands, and you try to get your tiles to fit into one of them. So it's more of a, what are your tiles? What's your luck? And what can you figure out? And if it's not working, can you convert to something else? And if you're not doing well, how are you going to stop your fellow people from winning? So it's not a hard game, but it's an enjoyable game for me because I like the complexity of having to change and to convert hands. So it works out well for me.
So so should have had to played poker. The first time I thought of killing him, the two of us were having chicken sandwiches at a fast food place with the oversized rubber bird anchored to his roof. Was this kind of a segue, a conscious segue or an unconscious segue into your Sarah Blair mysteries, where you now have a culinary theme?
No, it actually had nothing to do with it. The way I write, whether it's a short story or a book, I usually hear a character's voice or I hear a sentence or some little idea comes to me. And like I said, I wanted to write the opposite and I wanted to have a reason why the mother had left. And so I had her leave for fear of she might have killed her husband, that she might think about doing it.
Mhm.
And then that line came to me that it's the opening line of the book. And I thought it was funny. So I stuck it in there. And from there, I went. For me, when writing is working, it just flows. When writing isn't, I might as well go take a hike.
So on your website, in your biography, it says Sarah, like me, is a cook of convenience who might be scorched if she gets too close to the kitchen. So, and you mentioned it, you're not a culinary person. So
I'm
did
a
you
good eater, though.
a good eater? Yeah. Um, uh, so with your other books, you were drawing from your personal law experience and stuff for it. Was it the same way, putting that sort of twist into her character?
Yes and no. Yes, because I made Sarah be a cook of convenience. I mean, since the pandemic, I've been cooking more than I've cooked in all the years of my marriage. I've managed to blow up the brain of the stove. I've managed to put the food on fire one time. I mean, some of my activities are very comedic, much like hers. But I also gave her a twin sister. I'm the mother of twins. So I gave her a twin sister and made them polar opposites. My twins are like that, boy and girl, though, but you would think I had a litter as opposed to having, twins because
Mhm.
they are so different. So I decided to do that. Plus, my mother, as I said, was a very good cook. And I decided to steal from that because my sister would shadow her in the kitchen every night. I would plop down on the sofa in our den, turn on the TV at 5 o'clock. At 5:15, I'd run upstairs and empty the dishwasher during the first commercial of Perry Mason. At 5:30, I set the table. At 5:45, I waved hi to my dad because he came in from work, and dad would be ready to sit down for dinner at 6. So I never saw the very final credits. I saw the last act of Perry Mason, but not the credits. It's only in reruns that I've caught those. Um, but I became the lawyer. My sister cooks really well.
Actually, I should have asked this. So when I had asked if books and stuff from your past and in your law career influenced your writing, TV and movie too. What obviously Perry Mason. What other types of TV, movie, and stuff growing up influenced you wanting to write mystery stories?
I think Perry Mason was the main one. I also think there were some if you remember, there were some four different movies. One was with Rock Hudson, I think, and Susan St. James, and Macmillan and wife, I believe. I thought that was a cute whodunit. And then there was one with Dennis Weaver. They would rotate them. Um, I thought that was well done. But basically, Perry Mason really had an influence. Plus the books that I read, I love the whodunits, like of Cherry Ames. And I found some old 1944 books by somebody named Janet Lambert back then. They were, they were in my library, and I would read I was one of those kids who would spend the summer and finish the summer reading in 48 hours, and then just they didn't know what to do with me. So I found all these old books, and they were so well crafted that's where I got the idea of characters and stories. And so I stole from that as my influences. I can't say, even though I write cozies, Jessica Fletcher was never my model.
That was going to be my next thing. Did you ever watch The Murder She Wrote? And
I did watch it. I've watched it, but I always figured I could, the way those were done. There were two things I found in those kind of shows. One, I could always see if you look to see who the guest star was, because you figured they were the murderer. And then, they were more simplistic than I wanted to write.
what about did you ever watch Fantasy Island? Would you consider
Yes,
that like a whodunit?
in some ways, it depended on the episode.
Mm.
Because they would be waiting for the plane. They would always know. But to me, Fantasy Island and The Love Boat, again, were character studies. There would always be a happy couple, a not so happy couple, and one that would be kind of in the middle that you realized was something other than what they had purported to be.
What are some of your favorite TV shows today that you like to watch?
I tend to be somewhat procedural. I watch a lot of the news. I don't know why, but the last few years I've been very hooked on some of those programs. But you know, um, I'm very good at just kind of hanging back and watching some of the procedurals more than anything else.
like Law and Order and Bones and
Some of those, and in fact,
Castle.
I'm going to be interviewing Kathy Reich from Mystery in the Midlands on June 26th. So I better make sure I'm up on Bones, because that's her baby.
Yep.
And but generally, I guess some of the Law and Orders, but I like old reruns of Perry Mason and such. I mean, and I like old movies, but I like some of the funnier ones. Take a Miss Congeniality or something. I love how the characters interact.
So was Perry Mason ever an influence you on your getting a law degree, or
Yeah,
consciously or something? You think so?
I think I might have had I couldn't decide, but I thought Raymond Burr and Della, Perry Mason and Della were quite a team, and I liked how the structure of that show worked, because you kind of had you knew 15 minutes they set it up, 15 minutes everything fell to, and then you had the trial, and then there would always be a twist at the end, like an O. Henry twist, and Perry would figure it out. So it was very simplistic, but it was an influence. And I don't know why. And now watching it in rerun, you go, oh my God. First of all, some of those early episodes are so sexist, which didn't seem back then. And then the other thing is, you look at how they were filmed back then, because considering what we see today with the complexity of things.
Mhm.
But back then, for example, if they want to shoot a scene, they'd have Raymond Burr sitting here, and they'd have his girl Friday sitting right next to him. Who shares the desk and has her answer the phone in between them? If Paul Drake came in, Della would move to the end of the table, and they would shoot the camera down the desk. They just didn't have the camera angles we have today.
Right. I'll have to look for that next time. So your first book in the Sarah Blair mysteries is One Taste Too Many, and I will say I love the way in series I like titles. Last night we had Richard Cass, who was also with Five Star, by the way, and he just after he got 6-month run on his book before they canceled the whole mystery thing, but his always did all his series dealt with sort of jazz noir is what he calls it, or what it's been called.
Mhm.
So there's a jazz bar. Well, it's a revolves around the Esposito, which is a jazz bar in Boston. And so all his titles kind of had that theme: solo act and solo. I can't remember the other one, and then it kind of went on with the jazz theme. Yours it has that culinary theme. So you got one taste too many, two bites too many, three treats too many, and then you have your next one. Um,
Four cuts too many
Four
comes out.
cuts too many, right? So I like how those
Well,
follow one or the other. What was that? What made you decide to do it that way?
I like the idea. The one taste too many, I just like the idea of.
Mm,
Okay. I like the idea. I was playing with taste and I was playing with numbers. And then my editor from Kensington didn't love the original way we were going to do it, but he liked, so he asked for more things. So we took two of them and put them together because he liked the taste. He liked the number series because he figured I between you and me, I have a feeling he probably was thinking Janet Ivanovich,
mhm.
1, 2, 3. But
Yeah,
he
that
liked
was my
that
first thought.
because it gives the reader a clue where they are in the series. So I think he did that, and then he loved the idea of doing the too many. So we have the one taste too many, as you said, the two bites, the three treats, and the four cuts. The one that I just turned in that'll come out next year is five bells too many, Belles.
Mhm.
But I decided to, since I have it set in the South, I decided to have some Southern bells come into play. But of course, there's food in that one too.
I very rarely pat myself on the back, but I really had to do that, and I don't know if you 'cause I think you shared the post that I had made this morning reminding people about it. I don't know how close you read it, but uh, I did the culinary theme with my post.
You
I
did.
said tonight we're going to feature a culinary themed mystery series with writer Debra H Goldstein. Deborah is a former litigator turned writer. Sarah Blair mysteries. Sarah's a cook of convenience. And I said, so how can you not be hungry for more about Deborah and her books? Well, to get a free seat at the table, you must register first. Click the event post for link for further details. And if you'd like to sink your fork into her books, blah 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 blah. So, I sorry.
You did well. You did
um,
very well.
so one thing, back to you now. One thing I love about the first book, at least the way you showed it on your website, is that you, and I really appreciate this, is you listed a few of the independent bookstores that your book is at.
Yes.
And I thank you very much for doing that. I know they're not my bookstore yet, um,
You'll
but
be on there now.
they will, and they are on their way. We will be getting them. But we really appreciate when authors do that, or at least bookshop.org and indiebound.org, which you have those are indiebound on there as well. We really do appreciate that.
Well, I think supporting the indies is very important. And when I first started out, I was with a small publisher, the Maize and Blue book. And like I said, I didn't know enough. Um, those were the kind of books, even though they did get into the big stores, it was the indies who gave me a chance. Yeah, they would let me come in, and whether it was on consignment, because I mean, this has been such a different world. Back then, a lot of the indies would say, please come, we'll do it on consignment.
Mhm.
And for those who don't know, consignment means I bring the books and it's a split between the bookstore and me. But one of the small bookstores in Birmingham gave me a chance. And we did very well. That book ended up being on the bestseller list for them for 11 weeks, so that's not
Nice.
bad. But this Kensington series, they did that, in the big box. You'll find it in all the big box stores as well as the
Mhm.
indies. And so I've always um, believed in, well, I guess one of the things is I give away a good part of my pre-order money, and I give away the first month of, the royalty type thing, because I want to support things. So most of them, the first ones would go to nonprofits. And like this time, the Four Cuts Too Many is going to the Animal Savers of Pell City. It's the main one, which is a rescue thing where they take animals from Alabama rather than having them killed, and take them. They have two places up north and down in Florida for adoption and such,
Mhm.
and they have it all worked out. So that was important to me, but the indies gave me a chance to do that kind of thing. But the funny part with Kensington now, I've reached a different stage. I don't bring the books anymore. I discovered the bookstores order them. So it's
Mhm.
been a very delightful change. In fact, um, I was at a bookstore this today. I'm going to have there's a signing coming up in a few weeks when the new one comes out, and they just received their first shipment, and so they were taking pre-orders. So I was already signing them,
Oh,
and
you still there?
I'm still here.
Kind of froze up here for a second.
But I signed books today, and that's the fun part. And I know that I sent you book plates so that people can actually get a signed book.
Okay. Actually, you froze up there for a second, but that was weird. It's still going
On Facebook.
on Facebook Live, but the Zoom froze up. So so you were saying, if you wouldn't mind repeating that,
Okay,
you're having a book signing coming up.
what I said was I was signing books live today for the books that have already been pre-ordered from this place, from this bookstore, and from an indie store. And I have different things like tonight with a number of indies. Last night it was a library. I've got a number of these. But I also said that you can provide a signed book because you have signed book plates to do so.
Right, right. Yeah, that's one wonderful thing about the book place. We actually had our very first book signing in 14 months a couple weekends ago, and it went really well. So we're really hoping to get those going again. We also have a consignment program, and we'll start off with, if we're not quite sure how it's going to go, we'll do it on consignment, and then if the books end up selling, which we've every year we have our table of our 20 top
Mhm.
sellers, stores top 20 sellers, and for 2020, almost half of them were local writers.
What
So very it's neat to see that people are getting, that we're able to get those out there, and and that at that point, then I'll just start ordering them, and to heck with the consignment, because that's really kind of a pain in the neck. But
well, that's what happened. I found with my first two books, the few stores, one in particular that always let me, would always give me a thing because they did the same thing you're talking about. They supported the local authors. They would start with consignment, and then at that point they were selling them, so they just needed to restock.
yep. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start talking about One Taste Too Many, and then all of them. So we all know that there's a culinary theme throughout. Oh, you know what? Before that, though, you mentioned way back at the beginning, and I'm looking at your covers now. You said that cozies always have to have cats on the covers.
Or
Why?
dogs. They usually have an animal on them and often a cat. So that was actually comical for me because I grew up with dogs. That's why there's a dog in the second book. I understand
Yep.
dogs. I had to, part of the research besides was to learn about the cats. I had to go interview friends who really had cats. And I'm going to hold the cover up for a reason. If you can see the cat on here, it's a Siamese cat. My friend had a Siamese cat. I spent like 3 hours interviewing her, watching the cat sit on her feet, curl on her neck, do all these things that she kept telling. And she's talking about it, and the cat's doing these things. And I said, and then I got home and I was putting my notes together, and all of a sudden I get an email with a picture of her cat. And when Kensington asked me, and because I kind of had used the language of her cat in the book, the coloring, and when Kensington asked me, what should the cat look like? I'm sitting there looking at the picture of her cat and I'm writing, well, it should be beige. It should have kind of bluish eyes. It should, and they did it. And that's how Ra Ra basically came to look like my friend's cat.
Do
Um,
your cats, or do your animals in any of the, well, do you have animals and cats in the books? And if they do they have a dialogue or a speaking part?
no, Ra Ra, who is the cat, Sarah Blair was married at 18, divorced at 28, and all she got out of the marriage was Ra Ra the cat. In the first book, One Taste Too Many, you saw that there's rhubarb. Every time there's a book, they put the food that is maybe involved in it
Okay.
and in the recipes, and it's not giving anything away. Sarah's husband, the rat, ran off because he met the bimbo Jane, and Jane is a character in the books. To answer the question, she ends up with Ra Ra, but she goes from her luxurious life to living basically in an efficiency apartment with Rara. Life is going to get better in the next books because Rara ends up owning a house, but that's another story. But Rara is a cat. Rara behaves like a cat, is mischievous like a cat, reacts like a cat, does not think, does not speak out loud. When Fluffy comes into the picture in book 2, in Two Bites Too Many, you see Fluffy, but you also see Rara. Rara is the alpha male. Fluffy is the follower. This one has a lot of drinks in the recipes. That's why they put a drink on the cover. But like I said, I knew dogs, so I had to give some in there. But again, Fluffy acts like a dog, has to be walked, has to be fed. My animals are an integral part of the characters because how an animal behaves can influence, and the reader can find. If a cat bristles to you, maybe that's not a good person. If a cat takes to you, especially if it's a little ornery, maybe there's something you should like about that person. So
Mhm.
there's things like that, but I let the cat behave like a cat. And I did my homework on these books. I went and shadowed vets. I did the same thing to learn about kitchens and restaurants. I have a lot of friends who are restaurateurs, and they had a great time taking me through their restaurants, showing me things like, for example, one of my friends took me through this room. All this stuff was lined up very nice. The room was kind of cold. And we walked through and we came out the other side. She said, "Do you know what you just were in?" And I said, "No, a room." She said, "No, no, no. You just went through a walk-through refrigerator." And she said, "If this door hadn't been there, it would have just been a refrigerator." I went, "Okay." But I learned, and you'll find like and I stole lines from different people. One of my other friends had a restaurant with somebody that he'd sold out, and he and his wife opened a new restaurant, but it took about a year and a half till they got off the ground with investors and
Mhm.
things. And I was sitting there interviewing him to learn about what it's like to start over from scratch. And he just happened to point behind him to a fixed light fixture that was over the bar. And he says, "I could have put in a few $1,000 light fixture, or I could have that one that's there for a few hundred." He said, "But I figured when it gets dark and there's just the little lights coming down, people aren't going to be looking at the light fixtures. They should be looking at the drinks. And it's more important that I put good money into things in my kitchen to make better food." And that's what he did. And so I stole that for the book.
Did you also steal other people's characteristics to develop your characters, or to develop, or actual bars or restaurants to make your restaurants?
I did. I stole. I went. I'm very lucky in Alabama. We have the Frank Stitt restaurants. James Beard winner, and I talked to people in those restaurants. We had the Hastings, Chris Hastings, who won the beat Bobby Flay on the
Mm.
one of those champion shows. I talked to him and his wife, those kind of things. But then I had my other friends who took me really through everything in the back. So I stole from them. I also stole from characteristics to make a chef. Emily, the twin sister, is a fantastic chef. And as I said in the first book, when Sarah's ex-husband is found dead on the first page, Emily's the one who is the prime suspect. Emily always knew what she wanted in life. She was going to be a chef, and she worked her way up. She went to she went to Culinary Institute of America, CIA. She worked from line cook to sous chef all the way up. And Sarah's always been a little bit because her sister has always been goal driven, and Sarah doesn't know what she wants. So it's a dichotomy of them. But Sarah does know and believe in family. But I took the characteristics because one of the things every good chef seemed to tell me was they take recipes, but they doctor them. They make them their own. And it's almost as if they added love. And somebody actually said that. So I have in one of the books, um, Emily is discussing what she puts into the recipes, and she can't really explain it, but she'll doctor the recipes. But Sarah realizes what your sister's putting in is love, whereas Jane across the way, in Three Treats Too Many, the difference in her recipes is She just cooks from the recipes.
Mm. Did you watch a lot of cooking shows to prepare for your books, to get ideas for different chefs, different recipes, and different um, like knives and pots and pans and things like that, instruments?
Depending. I love competitive competition, as I mentioned earlier. And even though I don't cook, I'm an addict for like Top Chef and Chopped.
I like
And
Chopped.
so I would watch these shows and I actually learned, you don't realize it, but you're picking up clean the plate, do this, what you can make out of these. And I'm always amazed when they give them, okay, here is a machine in a gas station. You each get to pick 3 items and make a beautiful dish out of them. And somebody takes the cheese curls and makes this fantastic dish. And I'm thinking, how did they even come up with that in so many minutes? So yeah, I stole some of that, but when it came to the recipes, some of them were ones I knew, some I had Googled, some I had read. Like the Jello in a can was in every woman's magazine apparently in the 50s because Dole Pineapple and Jello got together and they had a whole bunch of recipes. Jello in a can, they had a 4th of July recipe. So I stole from the recipes that existed. And um, like the spinach pie made out of Stouffer souffle, one of my mother's friends who many years ago wrote a cookbook and I inherited it, she gives you 3 different recipes for spinach pie, very intricate recipes. And then I turned the page and there's the one to use the Stouffer souffle. And all you do is you put a layer of cheese in a pre-made pan, pre-made crust. You put some mushrooms, you put some Stouffer souffle, you add another layer of everything, and you put some cheese on the top. You bake it, and you're done. And it looks great, and it comes out well every single time. So, um, so yes, I poured over some cookbooks, and that's the funny thing. For a person who doesn't cook, I collect cookbooks at times because I like the ones that tell me things. Like one of my favorites is a Biltmore one. The Biltmore being, in the Vanderbilt house. But the book has all the recipes. But what's really interesting is between the pages, all the history of the house
Right.
and the family. That's what I like.
My wife always used to make fun of me because I would burn water when we
Hmm.
first started dating and first got married. But her mother went and got me for Christmas one year the Encyclopedia of Cooking, and it had all the recipes and stuff. It went from A to Z, and then the margins it would have things about the different either ingredients or culinary terms, things like that. So from that point on, I took to cooking really well, which burning water wasn't really true because I used to make my own stuff when I was a kid, and it
Hmm.
was kind of like Chopped. I would just take whatever was in the refrigerator and make it for breakfast or for lunch, and my mother would cook dinner later on. And so now that I can cook, um, my kids always say I should go on Chopped. And I said, well, the problem with that is I would have to have my iPod, well, or my phone, and because I always used to cook to heavy metal music.
Hmm.
That's and I would have the radio blaring. I'd be air drumming with a chef's knife in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other, and just everybody stay away from me, obviously. So yeah, I'd never make it on Chop because I would have to have that music in the background.
Well, tend to cook, when I did do some more cooking and this last year, I tended to do it to show music because I kind of knew how long a song was. And and the other thing I would do, which I have to admit, and Sarah does the same thing. If I wasn't sure, I would take a picture with me to the store to make sure I matched it to the right ingredient.
So all your books in this series is are they all standalone books? Obviously, they have the same main characters in them, but are they able to be read standalone, or do they build on the one before where you kind of need to start with One Taste Too Many?
It's nice if you read the series in order, however, you don't have to. They are standalone. I wrote it that way deliberately. The one advantage, if you start and read the whole series, is you see her starting, as I said, married and then divorced, and you watch the evolution of the characters. So you get to see her interact with the characters, and you meet different characters in the books who, for example, in the first book, Emily is a key chef. but if she gets waylaid by the police because she's the prime suspect, Sarah's going to have to take her place in a cooking competition or an expo. But her sous chef is a woman named Grace Whiston. The character's there, but it's a side character at that time. And you like Grace, or I hope you do, in book one. She's mentioned in book two, and she gets a side role. But in Four Cuts Too Many, she's the main suspect.
Mm.
So it helps you if you know the characters, but you don't need to. That's what all the reviewers tend to say about those books. They can stand on their own, but then people like to go back and read the whole series.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So where you have like that one there, that character going from first couple books, minor, you know, an appearance in the second one, but a major role in the fourth book. What are some of the characters that um, you didn't expect? Did you expect her to make such a prominent role in your fourth book?
No, I didn't. I when I first started, I didn't. When I wrote her in, I just liked her, and she was different than Sarah. She was an African American woman who had had a tough time, but who really could stand up for herself. And she worked for Emily, and she was, had come through some learning, being in the junior college culinary department. By the time of the fourth book, she's still working for Emily and Emily's partnered Chef Marcus, but she is also Grace is also being an adjunct teacher at the community college. She's teaching a knives course or skills in knives, and that's where the Four Cuts Too Many comes in, because that book plays with knives, which I also had to research, because like I wrote one of my chef friends and I said, okay, I want to do an ice pick murder, and I'm not giving anything away, but an ice pick murder, the knife has to go right in and it has to be sharp enough to pierce and kill. And I said, could you give me some knives? I can look at these knives on the thing, but what knife would do that effectively? And so I said, should I use a lobster knife? Should I use this? I'm looking for something sharp. And my friend, said, no, use a deboning knife. You can just, and it worked. So, like I said, I have to research a lot, but it pays off.
Right, right. So when you wrote certain sections where it had something technical like that, that you got the advice from chefs and other people, would you go back to them and let them read that portion, or did you have like beta readers specifically for uh, certain parts to make sure that what you ended up writing from the information they gave you was still accurate?
Pretty much I have beta readers and some editors who look at things, but no, I don't usually give it back to them. I am a pretty good note taker. So when I interview somebody, probably from my litigation experience and such, I almost get verbatim down on my notes. And if I'm not sure of something, I'll either call them back and double check, or I'll research it online, or I'll go read a book, whatever it takes, because I do want it to be accurate. But every now and then, like a 5-star, I had a laugh, because when you go through the different levels of editorial review for any book, you're reviewed perhaps, a line edit. Is your grammar right? Is this right? But there's always somebody who looks at it from a perspective, is it technically right? And in that book, yeah, I got most everything right, except the woman wrote, you can't use the flowers you put on the table. I said, excuse me? And she said, they wouldn't be blooming yet in the South. You're 6 weeks too
so,
early. I'm going,
so
okay, let's take the flowers off the table.
so out of all these culinary and technical things that you're writing into this book, the one thing that was a miss was the flowers. That's
Yes.
that's good. So when you take notes, did you do it in longhand, or did you learn shorthand from your law thing? Did you ever use shorthand?
I never use shorthand. I might have a few symbols that I would use, that, like a delta for a defendant, things like that. But for the most part, I write quickly, and I can take notes while I'm looking at you, while I'm interviewing you.
Mm.
And so, but really, people will tell you, and people like to talk. Like if I wanted to talk to you about your bookstore, if I'm willing to listen, I'll learn a lot.
Right, right. Definitely listening to you and listening to all the other ones that we've interviewed. I've learned a lot about the writing industry, the different genres, subgenre upon subgenre
Mhm.
of the main, thing. Um, so with so some of your going back to your characters,
Sure.
did you have a character that minor character that you just wanted to, gonna have a minor role and is still showing up every once in a while. I mean, you have the one who's the fourth book and that kind of pops up and because it fits, but you really don't like this character, but it just has to pop up at some
Well,
point.
the bimbo Jane fits that role because she is always a thorn in their side. Um, I have a person who is on the city council, and that person, as the books evolve, she'll be running for mayor. She, she starts out, and you really don't like her in one book as much, but you start seeing other sides of her, and you realize that even though she's authoritative, shall we say? That's her personality. But then you have another woman who actually, in book two, she worked in the bank and she ends up running, she ends up being a city councilwoman at some point. And she's just the opposite. In the book three, I bring in a motorcycle gang but it's not really a gang. It's, we all think of motorcycle riders in a stereotypical manner from TV and such. But I learned doing some United Way work about all these people who do all this charity work, who are writers. And then I had taken a class, and there was a really nice couple. He was a principal, she was a teacher, and the three of us kind of bonded. And one day they asked me, would I take notes for them? It was a community ed class because they'd be gone the next weekend and the Thursday of the class. And I said, sure. Are you going someplace fun? And they said, yeah, we belong to a motorcycle riding group. And I'm looking at them, and they're the last things you'd expect from the stereotype of that I would have thought of. And they go, yeah, we always pick places and we take these trips once a year. Well, I worked that in. I made the community, a lot of people in the community, the veterinarians ride. And to go back to one of your things, sometimes I have created a character because I needed that character. I didn't even know she was going to come. There's a character, Carol, in the third book, who is a vet tech. And she didn't exist when I was thinking about the book, but I needed somebody to, I didn't want the veterinarian. I needed somebody to hold the animal, to be loving. And she worked out. One of the funnier characters, though, is Mother Maybell. And she doesn't show up. The twins' mother is a true Southern belle who can tell you, bless your heart. And I took that from one of my friends who is the most diplomatic Southern belle, charming woman who can be telling you where to go with the Southern colloquial language, and you don't even realize what she just said to you. So I took that, and in the first book, they mentioned their mother and that she has, they mentioned some peculiarities about her, but she's down in Mexico taking a vacation. Okay. In the second book, she comes in full force, and you realize that Mabel, she takes no prisoners. She is a very decisive woman, but she's also very Southern and charming. So she has a big role in the second book because she's a main suspect. But later on in the other books, she's to the side, but she's always often comic relief, and yet she's not funny. Um, but she does things that you're going to be entertained by, I hope. And she is a predominant character in the fifth book, Five Bells Too Many. That one that comes out next year has five different people competing to be the perfect wedding, and you have the typical young people, but you have the one senior citizen couple, and Maybell's part of that. But in Four Cuts Too Many, I really had fun with the characters because I went into the community college and it let me bring in characters. It let me bring in a whole nother side of the community.
Well, when you're talking about Maybell there, and we were talking before we went live and started the interview and stuff, and we were talking about dialects and accents and things like that. When you said from one of my friends, I heard a Southern accent come out of
I didn't tell you I hadn't picked up some. I've been down here a
you.
long time.
So is there do you have a character that you loved so much but you knew at some point, be it in the first book or maybe in the second book at the latest, that this character has to go? um and if you did, how did you feel when you had to write that ending? Case in point is, there's one we interviewed, had a very prominent character, but they knew at some point that character had to die, because it was part of the story, and that they
Mhm.
really had a really hard time writing that death scene for that character, because one, a lot of the fans and a lot of their readers loved that character. And then they of course got in flack for doing what what they did. But
What I try to do is make every character, even with their flaws, sympathetic to some way. Even even if you don't like Jane has all these flaws, but at the same time, you also see her weaknesses. I have not killed a character that is a major series character that would be like what you're asking about yet. Now, if the books continue for another 5, 10 books, I'm sure that will happen. But at this point, I have built up characters, but I have not killed one that, usually the person is somebody who's come into that book. Like in Three Treats Too Many, I brought in a vegan chef because I want to bring in other ideas. So when Jane opens a restaurant across the street from where Sarah and her sister have opened a restaurant, and Sarah only is in there not for cooking, she owned the building. And so the only way Marcus and Emily would take any money from her was to have her in the restaurant. So in this particular situation, um, they were both farm to table, but um, the James place is doing fantastic business because they get to open, but Sarah's place doesn't get to open because there's no final inspection. But Jane's place has all these vegan recipes that everybody adores. Unfortunately, that chef gets killed very quickly. So you have to figure out what happens thereafter. In Four Cuts Too Many, I had everybody liking, I think, the character. Um, Sarah is coming along. She's divorced. She's sort of dating. She's considering going back to school. Life is going better for her. And I have brought in Grace, but I have given Grace a new boss in the cook in the school. And he doesn't make it beyond the first chapter. So I really go, I may kill somebody, but it's more complex, the interrelationships of the people involved.
now, one of the things that I've learned about cozies, um, it was when I started the bookstore. We haven't been open for for almost 3 years. Um, I know a mystery, I know a thriller, I know a police procedural. Actually, I learned the term the other night, but I know what it is. But I really wasn't familiar with what a cozy was, and I had people asking me, do we have any?
Mhm.
So, of course, especially doing this here, I figured out and think I have a good grasp as to what it is. Definitely, your books fit. One thing that I did learn, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to the murder aspect of it, it's more hinted around than full on graphic
Yeah.
blood and all that kind of stuff there. How I don't want to say explicit, but how graphic do you get in your books when it comes to that scene?
Um, you may like in this one, you may see in Four Cuts Too Many, that you look through a door and there is the body sprawled on the table with a knife hanging out of his neck. You get the message. There's debris on the floor, but you're not going to see that. You may see a trickle of blood, but you're not going to see gore. You're not going to see somebody in the midst. Now, you may have a fight go on, you may have something go on, but you're not going to see very graphic on the page. Um, and you may have some romance, but generally the door will close before it actually takes place. Um, So,
Right.
the kiss may be chaste, the hug may be chaste, but today mysteries are, even the cozies have gotten a little edgier. One of the things, Chris, that I do in all my books, I don't beat you over the head with them, but I always include social issues because I think that's important.
Mhm.
Like Sarah in all the books has the animal interest. She walks dogs at the shelter. She raises money for the shelter. I bring in economic development because when a community is rechanging itself, you have economic development. I bring in issues, and I want you, like in the third book, I bring in PTSD, not only of humans, because I have the veterinarians be vets in more ways than one,
Mhm.
but I have a dog with PTSD who had served in the military. And I bring the issues in, but like I said, they're there, but they're not as prominent as they might be in a different type of book. But I hope you'll be thinking about them and after you finish the book, or while you're actually, I hope it's in the subconscious process.
Mhm. Now, is this something from when you were a litigator and all the civic volunteering that you did, that you worked these into your, or just the person that you are is socially conscious, and so that's, you wanted to make sure you work that into your books?
I think so. I think they have something social has been in every one of my books. Even Maize and Blue, which was students on the University of Michigan's campus,
Mhm.
involved, had a subplot with domestic violence. And I had done a lot of work in that area with a certain group, um, with the Y here. And I had done a lot of volunteer work that ends up being in the books. I can't help it. I just can't write just pure fluff. I have to have my fluff have something behind it too.
Right, right. Um, well, kind of speaking of fluff, that kind of goes on another word, a term that I learned, is tropes. And um, every mystery book, actually every genre, kind of has their stereotypes and tropes and stuff that you follow along. How do you in these books keep those type of things that people are expecting in a cozy? How do you keep them fresh? Is it with the social issues? Is it the culinary aspect of the mysteries?
Well, I think in mine, there's one aspect that's a little different because of the fact that I made her a person who finds being in the kitchen more frightening than murder. That is an opposite of what you expect in a cozy. Her sister, who finds cooking so wonderful, she's more of what you would expect
Mm.
as the cozy. So my amateur sleuth, um, is investigating. Some of the other characters, I think, yeah, I have a bank president in one, and he acts like a bank president, city councilman, a little pompous, a little this, that. But at the same time, I think if I can round out the characters, and that's my goal, is to make it more realistic, so that when you read my books, I hope you identify with the characters. And like you asked about traits earlier, I hope you find traits of your friends or traits of people you know. And so therefore you go, I want you to use your imagination. I may tell you that there's dark hair, and I may tell you that they're polar opposites. That Emily was built in, could have been, it was a cheerleader in high school, whereas Sarah is tall, lanky, and dark haired. She has great hair, whereas the other one has thin hair. But I want you to imagine what they look like and use
Mhm.
your imagination. I don't want to spell out everything for you. And it's the same way in their traits. Um, Sarah has an on again, off again boyfriend, Cliff, who will show up in a lot of the books when she meets him. But he has flaws and he has good things. But there's a moment or so on a boat that I think you see a part of his personality that you can understand why she'd be interested in him.
So Four Cuts Too Many comes out in 4 days on the 25th,
Yes.
and we'll have it in store
Well,
around
hope.
that time. And yes, so book five, getting book five started, and then of course with all the rest of your books, when you sit down and or well, how do you, when you come up with the idea for the book, how do you start? Do you sit? Is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? Is it kind of whenever you feel like it? Do you work with a deadline because you work with a publisher, so you must have a deadline? Um, how often do you write a day? We have one author who divided how many hours he worked it out to how many hours a day he would have to sit, or how many words a day he would have to sit and write to get to that goal of the
Oh,
date
a
for
lot of
submission.
authors do that. My first book, had no deadline for, One Takes Too Many. I wrote it as I wanted. Unfortunately, I was writing it and it was going great guns. I mean, like I said, I hear a sentence or I have a concept that comes into my head. And in this case, it was the reverse of her cooking. And I was just going great guns because once I got into the characters, I was having fun. And then I got about halfway through the book and my mom passed away. And it I didn't realize how much it impacted me because I went back to writing. And then I realized I didn't like the book. I didn't like anything from about the middle on. And I had a few months there where I didn't write at all. And then I finally realized I just put it aside for a few days, few weeks. And then it hit me. I had the wrong murderer. So I threw out half the book and I rewrote. And once I did that, I was zooming through again instead of pushing it. And it's like um, my mom, when I was a kid, used to tell me I was funny when I was spontaneous, but I wasn't funny if I pushed it. And it's the same thing with the writing. Now, in terms of my process, I am not a good scheduled person. I don't do what your other writer did. I write more in spurts because life gets in the way. I've have other activities and things. If I have a deadline, it's going to get done for that deadline. But I made sure that I had like 11 months in between books because I know I can write the book in a shorter period, but I want to make sure it's right before I turn it in. But I also know that there could be a week that I don't write. When I was on the bench, I wrote between midnight and 4 a.m. That worked for me. Um, but I thought when I got off the bench, oh, I would be so structured. Yeah, I'm busier now than I was before. And it was kind of an interesting thing because when my first book came out, I divided the period between being a judge and not, and, I kept my two careers separate, though there were articles, Judge writes book. When I sold Should Have Played Poker and I knew it was coming out, I was still sitting on the bench. But I was also thinking how this was going to go. And then I was in court and I was on the bench for 23 years. And at that point, I had all the lawyers trained, Chris. And at the end of every hearing, I would go, is there anything further? They would go, no, Your Honor. And I would do a standard closing. On that particular day, um, the lawyer did exactly what he was supposed to do. And you have to picture me in a black robe and very serious. And I'm sitting up on this bench and I start to do my closing, but his client interrupts and goes, yes, there's one more thing. And I said to the lawyer, sir, and the lawyer went, so I knew the lawyer couldn't control his client. So I looked at the client and I said, yes, sir, what is it? And he goes, Your Honor, I just want you to know one thing. No matter how you rule, I'm going to buy your book. Well, at that point, I went home that night. We had just gotten the last kid out of school, and you told me your daughter is in, a junior in college. You know that feeling when they're about to come off the dole. But so I said to my husband, I have a lifetime appointment, but if I want to follow my passion, then let's run the numbers. And we ran the numbers, and we figured it would work. And I went in the next day and I announced I will take no more cases. I am staying till I work out my docket, which will be 6, 7, 8 months. But I am going to try my passion. And that's what I did. And like I said, I thought I'd be writing on a real tight schedule. I have since that time published that book and these 4, turned in the 5th, and had about 43, I think, short stories published in those few years. So it's been a good, productive 3, 4 years.
Do you know if he bought your book?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if he ever bought your book?
I doubt it strongly. I ruled against him.
Yeah, maybe he did. So when you're done your book, you go through the editing. How long do you take to self-edit before you turn it into the publisher's editors to do their thing?
I will write the book and I edit as I'm writing most of the time. And then when I get to the end, if I have time in the contract, I think will let a friend read it who hates mysteries. and I will let one read it who loves mysteries. And I will take their comments and compare them. I also will have a friend who is a private editor take a look at it. Um, and that, to me, has done two things. I did that starting with poker. I learned from those things because I know where I am a weak writer. Back when I was writing those, I knew I wasn't doing enough introspective thinking. So I have to go back when I write a book because my personality as a judge was to be more guarded. I have to go back and put those inner thoughts in. And I know I have to do that. But I'll have the editor will write me back and go, what would she have been thinking here? What was she doing? Why did she do this? And I'm going, oh, yeah, that's the hole. And I'll plug it and then I'll polish it up again. And when I turn it in, it's usually a pretty clean manuscript.
So when you get it back from your friends, what was the biggest rewrite you ever had to do because you had either the timeline was off or the wrong character did
But
the wrong thing?
in the first book, I was the one who caught the fact that they half the book was dull. Nobody saw that except me, and I rewrote it. And by the time they saw it, it was clean. Um, I've had to, rework. Like when I wrote economic development, my friend who was reading it added something to it. I've had to, I've had to add, as I said, introspective thoughts and things. But for the most part, um, it's like if they tell me that it doesn't work for them, or if it's boring for them, or if there's maybe too much filler without action. And that was what I had to learn was to keep it progressing because um, if a book I become so into it that maybe I'll think it's progressing. The first book I wrote, The Maze in Blue, like I told you, I had 85 pages, but the murder didn't happen. And I happened to meet Ann George, and I asked her about her writing because I had taken a bunch of kids to a Girl Scout thing that she was speaking at, and we were talking, and I said, I'm having a problem. This I have too much in here, I think, and it's like when you add too much backstory is what I was doing, and I don't have to give you a whole meeting. I can give you a meeting in a sentence or two. And I said, but to her, um, I have 85 pages and the murder is just about to occur. And I said, what do you do? Because everybody tells me the murder should be up early. And she says, oh, I just drop the body and then I work from there. And I had just read her brand new book. And she has the protagonist and the protagonist sidekick sitting at a table and they're having lunch and they look up and a body drops right next to them. So she was literal what she was telling me. And so I learned, that trick. So one of the things I do go back to look for, and if my friends tell me it's dull, I figure, okay, look at it carefully. You probably have too much backstory. You better sprinkle that through the whole book.
So when we talked about your how you came up with the titles for the books, a little bit on how you did the cover or how the cover was done, and
Yeah.
so when it came to that, though, obviously it was one of the publishers or people on staff that came up with the idea. Did you pitch the ideas that you wanted? Did they read the books to come up with the idea, and then was there some back and forth as far as how the cover was going to look?
No, not so much on that. They will ask me what I think the cover should have on it. And in the very beginning, I told them, because cozies often have one of two things. They're very simple. If you look at this, all you've got is the cat and the rhubarb, crisp um, that she's accused of having poisoned him with. But I told them I wanted it simple. The other kind of cozy has like a whole room and very detailed picture. And I said I didn't want that. I wanted it to be simple. Like Three Treats Too Many, they make it very clear because you have some soup recipes,
Mhm.
but I thought it was cute how they used the RIP in the middle of the soup. In the new one, when they asked me, I said, okay, I need a knife because that's the murder weapon. And the knife had been cutting cheese before. And I just gave him that blurb. I'll give him a blurb about it. And they supposedly they give the blurb and they give the synopsis and things. I don't know if they give them the whole manuscript, But I have been thrilled with how Kensington, they have nailed it on every single book.
Yeah, I like them a lot, especially four cuts too many. The cheese block and the knife and all the different cheeses and stuff. I'm a fan of cheese, anyways. But
Well, I thought they just did a great job of the variety and everything.
so talking about recipes, one thing I wanted to definitely get out because we're running out of time is you have your newsletter. Well, you have your website, debragoldstein.com, and you also have a newsletter, and people can sign up for that, and they can sign up and get recipes from you through
Kensington
those
has put
newsletters.
together an entire cookbook of all the recipes that appear in all four of the Sarah Blair mysteries. So if anybody signs up, send me an email at the DHG at debrahgoldstein.com, and I will send you a PDF recipe book of all the recipes, and they're all there's a few more complex recipes, but a lot of them are extremely cook of convenience recipes.
That sounds good. Um, so one of the final things I'd like to discuss real quick is any idea as far as audiobooks for any of
The
these?
first three books I know are available on audio. They're also available in large print and ebooks. Four Cuts Too Many, I know, has come out so far in print and in ebook. I don't know if they're bringing out an audio, and I haven't heard because I haven't heard yet. One Taste Too Many was out for a few months before I got word that it was audio. So I just don't know how that's going to work on the Four Cuts. But the other books are available in every single format.
Any thoughts of having it on any of your books, um, on the big screen, on the small screen, the Lifetime channel, Hallmark sort of movie type thing?
I'd be thrilled. Do you want to tell them about me?
Definitely will. Definitely will. So for your two main characters, for your sisters there, who would you want to portray them in real life?
Oh, it depends because you'd have to get the ages right. I mean, I kind of see Sarah could be the Sandra Bullock could do both aspects, a few
Mm,
years ago. I think it would probably be young actresses who are newer in the world today, rather than big names, because I think just like I wanted the characters to evolve, I think the actresses would also evolve in that book, but they'd have to be balanced because one would probably be, as I said, tall, lanky, and dark haired, but kind of awkward in some ways.
mhm,
And the other would be gregarious, thin haired blonde, and friendly, but tiny. So it's going to be a dichotomy of the two actresses. And then the other factors would be like Harlan, who's an attorney who's the only one who gave Sarah a chance. He gave her a job as his law firm secretary receptionist. He's not a tall man because there's a I usually describe her as standing over him or behind him, able to look down at the little bald spot in the back of his head. So there's a height difference.
mhm.
But you can see, imagine him with his bow tie and certain things. You can see him, and other characters. Each one has their own little idiosyncrasies, whether they have the kind of hair that looks like it's windswept, or whether they have an outdoor look, or whether they are, Mother Maybell could be
Mhm.
anybody, but you'd have, she could be any of the characters that would you'd have to have somebody with humor.
So would these be? Could you make these somebody make these into a series like a Rizzoli and Isles or Bones type of thing,
Oh, I
or
think
would
you
you
could.
rather have them?
I think you could, and I think you could easily write scripts for them, just like Murder She Wrote. I mean, there's hundreds of episodes because you take them, and the only thing we have to be careful of is not to have the Cabot Cove syndrome, that everybody who comes to town dies.
Right.
But Louise Penny's been good about that. I think just like I can make Wheat in Alabama kind of a character in itself, just like she made Three Pines.
Very good, very good. Well, that is our time for tonight. I do want to say that the audiobooks for the first three books are available through our partners, Libro.fm. Portions of sales come back to us if you go through our link, or you can go to Libro.fm and you can select our store or your own independent bookstore to to support. So those are there. All the hard copies of the books are available through bookshop.org. Again, bookstores partner with them and they remit some of the profits to us. Go through our link or select your local bookstore as well. Call your local bookstore to get them. We will have them pretty soon, as soon as and I'll put them up on our website and our Facebook page as soon as we have them available. You can definitely get them straight from Debra. And Debra, thank you very much for
Thank you.
being a
And
part of this.
one of the good things about them, because they're mass market, they're well priced. They're not
Yes.
going to bankrupt anybody.
Oh, and real quick with ours, you get yourself a free, you get a book plate to go along with it, so you end up having a signed copy of the books. We have plenty of those. So again, thank you very much for being a part of this, and hope to sometime soon have you in person
It would be
visiting
my
the store.
pleasure. Thank you for having me tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you everybody on Facebook. Thank you everybody here on Zoom, and hope everybody has a good night.
Take care, everybody.